She said it like I was a stranger in my own home. Like the years I'd spent scrubbing the tile with my knees, watching the roof sag and lifting it anyway, didn't count. It was a Sunday. She was in my kitchen, her voice tight like she'd been practicing the line. She told me to stay out of family business, that it was time I stepped back, that things were getting complicated and I shouldn't be involved. I nodded. That's all I did. But 3 days later, I watched her face when she flipped the third page of the deed and found my name, K, permanent and precise, above hers. I'm so glad you're here. Stay with me until the end and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this story travels. It's strange how memory plays favorites. I don't remember what I had for dinner the night she was born or the drive to the hospital. But I remember the weight of her when the nurse placed her in my arms, how her fists were balled like she had come here to fight. I remember the feeling of lifting her to my chest, not with fear, but with the quiet oath of a woman who has already decided she will give everything. And I did. I gave her the long nights, the scraped knees, the packed lunches with notes inside. I gave her a roof, then the attic when she wanted more space. I gave her privacy, then silence when she asked for it with a slammed door. I gave her the kitchen, the front garden, the room with the east-facing window. And later, I gave her time. I used to think time was a kind gift. That when you offer your time, your quiet presence, your steady hands, it mattered. That someone would look back and see all the meals, all the rides, all the nights I stayed up even when she said she was fine. But time disappears without witnesses. And when someone wants to forget you, they will. They'll forget the meals, the hours, the money. They'll say they never asked for it. They'll say you offered too much. The signs came soft at first, like the edge of a page curling in summer heat. My name stopped coming up when plans were made. I'd find out about family barbecues when I heard the laughter 2 doors down. Her phone would ring on the table, and when I looked over, she would pick it up and walk away. She started calling less, then stopping by only when she needed something printed or notarized. I asked once, gently, if I'd done something. She said no, just life being busy. And when I said I missed her, she patted my hand like I was being sweet. One afternoon, I sat in the living room while she took a call in the kitchen. She thought I couldn't hear. She spoke low, but I heard enough. She said I was getting too involved, that I liked control, that it might be time to start moving things around. I didn't breathe. I just watched the shadow of her pacing back and forth in the hallway glass. First time I felt something colder than distance. It was the sound of being edited out of a life you helped build. Weeks passed. She started showing up with her husband. He always had the folded papers, the quiet comments. One morning, she asked if I'd thought about downsizing. I told her no. I liked my home. She said she was just thinking long term. I nodded again. That's all I did. But I stayed up late that night reading through old files and documents I hadn't opened in years. I remembered the day I signed the house over into the trust, the lawyer nodding as he explained the language. I remembered my signature, sharp, deliberate, and mine. I started checking the mail carefully. There were things with my name spelled wrong. Letters from the city I hadn't requested. I opened one envelope and found an application I hadn't filled out, a request to transfer property authority. Her name was on it, unsigned, but there. I took a breath and slid it back inside, sealing it again with quiet fingers. I didn't confront her right away. I didn't shout or cry. Kay planted chrysanthemums near the porch and baked a peach cobbler like I always did in June. I waited. I let her talk around me, make calls from the hallway, send text messages from behind the napkin holder. I let her believe I was slipping. Maybe I didn't notice, but I noticed everything. And one day when she sat down at my table and said, again, that it was time I stepped out of family business, I reached under the placemat and slid a folder toward her. Inside were the ownership papers, updated, reviewed by my attorney. I didn't say anything. I just let her open it. Let her read my name, bold, exact, and impossible to erase. She froze. I watched the skin around her eyes shift. The polite daughter mask struggled to stay in place. She said nothing at first. Then she smiled, but her hands were shaking as she closed the folder. She asked why I'd updated everything without telling her. I said because it was my house, my name, my life. And because I needed to make sure the walls remembered who carried them through every winter storm. She didn't argue. Not then. She left in silence, but something shifted after that. Fewer calls, fewer visits. She stopped pretending, and I stopped. Hoping now I keep a copy of those papers in my drawer. Next to the photographs of us, when she was still someone who laughed with me, not about me. The house is quieter now. But it listens. I wasn't always this quiet. I used to fill the rooms with motion, setting down teacups, folding laundry on the couch, humming while watering the plants near the kitchen window. There was always something being cooked, some scent floating through the house, cinnamon, garlic, thyme, depending on the season, or my mood. The house had a pulse. It breathed with me, and she was my little shadow, always asking why. Why I folded towels a certain way. Why I talked to the tomatoes as I watered them. Why I never threw out birthday cards. She would sit at the table with her chin in her hands while I made soup. And sometimes she would start stories but never finish them. She liked listening more than talking back then. Sometimes I think she stored everything I said, even the things I never meant her to remember. Raising her alone was never something I resented. Her father left quietly, like a train pulling away before you realize you've missed it. She was only 4. I was 29 and terrified but determined. I told myself she would never feel the gap. Not if I worked hard enough. I took night shifts. I cleaned houses. I did payroll for a man who never remembered my name but always trusted my math. The bills were always paid on time. Her clothes were always clean. Her birthdays always had cake, even the year we had no electricity. I found a neighbor with an oven and carried the pan across the alley like it was made of glass. I skipped a lot of things, dating, friendships, even rest. I thought that's what mothers did, built their daughters strong and full, even if it meant hollowing yourself out a little to make room. She was bright, always sharp. I remember the way she could read expressions before she learned to read. Books. She'd watch people and copy them, mirror them. It scared me sometimes how easily she could be someone else. But I thought it was intelligence, survival. I was proud of her. I told her so when she turned 17. She told me she wanted to move away for college. I remember my chest tightening, but I nodded. I encouraged it. I helped her fill out applications, edited her essays, sent her off with the best linens I could afford and 3 boxes of dry snacks. I cried after she left, but not in front of her. That was always my rule. Let her feel strong. She called it lat at first. Homesick, overwhelmed, confused about who she was supposed to be. I always answered. I always said the same thing. It's okay to be unsure, but don't forget where you started. Don't forget who packed your suitcase. And somewhere along the line, she did dot. When she came back after graduation, she had a new voice, a sharper one. Her sentences clipped short. Ugh. She laughed at different jokes, wore clothes that didn't seem comfortable. I thought maybe she was just growing into herself, becoming who she needed to be in the world. I didn't realize she had also started the slow work of pulling away from me. She lived with me for a while after college. She said it was temporary. That was fine with me. I liked cooking for her again. I liked hearing the water run in the upstairs bathroom. I liked having someone to say goodnight to, even if she often didn't reply. Eventually she met him, the man she would marry. He was polite, handsome, a little too rehearsed. He complimented my roast but never asked for seconds. He helped wash dishes but always dried his hands before I could say thank you. He smiled too much, but he made her happy, or at least distracted. When they got engaged, I offered to help pay for part of the wedding. She brushed it off like I was offering her a coupon. She said they had it handled, that it would just be a small thing. The small thing turned into a full event, and I wasn't asked to help again. Just show up, sit in a chair, smile in the photos. Don't wear anything too loud. After they were married, they moved back in. It's just until they saved enough for their own place. It's what she said, but they stayed. And slowly, the house changed. He put up shelves I didn't ask for, rearranged the living room, told me the plumbing needed updating. I said it worked fine. He insisted it didn't. One day I came home and my china cabinet was gone. She said it didn't fit the aesthetic anymore. They had boxed it up and put it in the attic. Just until we had more space. That was the first time I felt a click. It's like a puzzle piece sliding into a shape I didn't want to see. My kitchen became their shared office space. He worked on a laptop while I made tea. She took calls on speakerphone and used words I didn't recognize anymore. Things like equity, restructuring, asset flow. Words that circled around me like wind I couldn't catch. And then came the whispers, the quiet hallway talks. The laughter that stopped when I entered a room. The way she started saying we when talking about the house. Not you, not yours. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that I was tired, that it was a hard year, that this was just what happens when your child grows up. They build a new rhythm, and you have to learn to dance beside it, not within it. But some rhythms don't include you at all. They march forward without pause, and I started to feel like furniture. She once said, gently but firmly, that it was time I started pulling back. That I was lucky to have them looking out for me. That I shouldn't worry about so many decisions anymore. That she and her husband would manage everything. Going forward, she said it like it was a kindness. I nodded. That's all I did, but I started listening more carefully. And my house started speaking to me in small, unsettling ways. I started with the drawers. There was a small desk in the back corner of the guest room. It used to be hers. When she was little, we painted it robin's egg blue together one summer. Let it dry on the porch while she chased butterflies in the yard. I'd kept it mostly untouched, except to tuck away stray mail or receipts. I didn't want cluttering the kitchen. Over time, it had become a resting place for the overlooked. And lately, I'd felt overlooked too. The top drawer still smelled, faintly of cedar and something like pencil shavings. I sifted through loose envelopes, tax slips, warranty cards for appliances I no longer owned. But halfway down, tucked behind a stack of outdated takeout menus, I found it. A letter with my name on it, unopened. The return address wasn't familiar. Some legal firm downtown. Sat on the bed and tore it open, careful not to rip the flap. Was dated nearly 4 months ago. The wording was dense, legalese. The kind of letter that's meant to confuse before it informs. But the parts that stood out were easy enough to understand. A notice of intention to alter primary property management. A request for review of durable power of attorney and something. About long-term care proxies, my name was in the header. So was hers. So was his. I didn't finish the letter in one sitting. I folded it back along its crease and placed it under my thigh, my hands trembling in a way they hadn't in years. My chest felt hollow and bright, like someone had struck a match inside it. The floor shifted. Not literally, but in that quiet way your mind shifts when something undeniable enters it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the lamp on low and the clock ticking louder than usual. I stared at the curtains and remembered all the little things I'd let slide. The conversations that didn't include me. The financial questions she waved off. The day I overheard her refer to the house as theirs when speaking to the contractor. It wasn't just talk, it was a plan. The next morning, I made tea the way I always did. Honey and lemon. I laid out 2 slices of toast and spread apricot jam across both. One for me, one I didn't touch. It helped to feel like I was still offering something, even if no one came to take it. She was gone for most of the day. I heard her heels on the tile around noon, heard her car pull out of the driveway 20 minutes later. I waited another hour before I opened the cabinet above the fridge. That's where they kept the file box, now black, heavy, unassuming. She thought I didn't notice, but mothers notice everything eventually. Inside were neatly labeled folders: utilities, home repairs, insurance, and one labeled simply trust. I opened that one last dot. Inside was a printout, a draft amendment. My name was still there, but so was language I'd never seen before. Things like revocable terms, successor trustees, caretaker reimbursement. It painted a picture I hadn't authorized one, where I was gently moved aside, like an old vase placed on a shelf to make room for newer decor. My hands went cold, not because of what they were trying to do, but because of how long they'd been doing it without telling me. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I took photos of every page and emailed them to myself. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I even wiped the surface with the hem of my sleeve. That evening, she came home humming. She kissed the air near my cheek and asked if I wanted to watch something on television. I said no, I was tired. Stinness, tired of what? That's when I knew I had to start planning too. The next day, I called an old friend of mine, Doreen, from the library committee. She used to work for a family law office before she retired. I told her I just needed a referral, someone discreet and kind. She gave me a name, and I made an appointment for the following Tuesday. I said I was going for lunch. I wore lipstick and my green wool coat. The lawyer's office was quiet and smelled like old leather. He was gentle in the way people are when they've seen too many betrayals to be shocked by any of them. I've told him everything, not just the documents, but the things you can't print. The silences, the small exclusions, the way your child starts calling you by your first name when others are around. He didn't interrupt. He just nodded. Then, he helped me draw up a formal review. He made calls. He reassured me that nothing had been legally finalized yet, that we could reinforce the trust in a way that protected me. He spoke of countersignatures, account verifications, and revocation. Protections. I nodded, absorbing it like I had during parent-teacher conferences, alert, afraid, but needing to understand every word. By the end of that meeting, I had a copy of everything, real copies. Updated, notarized, and legally bound to me. My name, firm and final. That night, I made tea again. I added a small splash of brandy just for warmth. I stood by the window and watched the lights in the neighbor's house flicker on, one by one. It comforted me to know someone nearby still followed. A predictable rhythm. I didn't tell her, not yet. I needed time. I needed to feel the weight of the truth settle inside me before I placed it in front of her. But I watched her more closely after that. The way she answered calls, the way her voice would drop just a fraction when discussing next steps. With him. The way she smiled too quickly after making decisions I wasn't part of. They thought I was drifting. They didn't know I'd returned. Not loud. Not in anger, but with ink. With presence. With papers that couldn't be undone by whispers in the hallway. And I was only just beginning. The thing about silence is that it sharpens your hearing. When you stop trying to fill every space with words, explanations, reassurances, small talk, you start noticing everything else. The tone behind a question, the pause before an answer, the size at the dinner table, the coded language that floats just beneath what's spoken. After I left the lawyer's office, I stopped talking so much. Not out of fear, out of clarity. I didn't want to interrupt what they were showing me. I started moving differently in the house. Slower, yes, but more deliberate. I would leave doors open just enough to catch the tail end of a sentence. I started paying attention to their rhythms when they made phone calls, when they whispered in the hallway, when the printer hummed quietly behind a locked study door. I began to understand that the erasure wasn't accidental. It was planned. Step by step, like a schedule scribbled on a whiteboard I wasn't supposed to see. I began checking the mail first, walking out with my sweater still on backward just to beat her to the porch. A few times I saw letters from banks I didn't recognize. One was from an institution I hadn't used since the 90s. Another from a firm that specialized in retirement transitions. Each time I copied what I could, wrote it down in a small notebook I kept tucked inside a hollowed-out cookbook. the one labeled comfort recipes for family gatherings. I hadn't opened it in years. The more I noticed, the more obvious it became. They were preparing to lift the house from beneath me, slowly, gently, like setting a table before taking away the chair. She didn't ask how I was feeling anymore. She didn't need to. They'd already decided. I saw it in how they spoke to me, patient, slightly elevated, like I was a child repeating questions I'd already asked. She once corrected me on the day of the week, and I knew I'd gotten it, right? I let her have it. I wanted to see how far she'd go. One afternoon, I stood at the foot of the stairs and heard them in the guest room. Her voice low but hurried, his voice firmer. She was saying she was almost done with the forms, that she just needed my signature for the final approval. He said something about making it official before winter. I didn't breathe, stayed still and stared at the photo hanging beside the hallway mirror, the one of her at age 10, holding a science fair ribbon like it was a trophy from the moon. I didn't recognize her anymore. Later that evening, she came into the kitchen while I was making soup, carrot and ginger, the kind she used to request after a bad cold. She smiled, told me it smelled amazing, and leaned against the counter with a form in her hand. "Just a quick thing to sign," she said. "Nothing complicated, just an update too. The contact list for the insurance policy, so things didn't get confusing." I dried my hands on the towel and took the paper from her. I didn't read it, not right away. I just stared at her. She shifted her weight, told me it was nothing urgent, just for peace of mind. I smiled, small, soft, the way I used to when she brought me a drawing I couldn't quite make out. Then I set the paper down on the counter, folded it once, then again, and slid it back to her. I told her I'd take a look at it later with my own attorney. There it was, the first crack. She didn't mask it quickly enough. Her smile stiffened. Her eyes fluttered like birds startled out of a tree. "So," she asked, "since when I had an attorney?" I said since she started bringing me papers I didn't ask for. She didn't argue. She just took the paper and left it on the kitchen table. And from that night on, she didn't bring me forms anymore. But the coldness came anyway. Her laughter changed. It happened less often and never around me. She stopped lingering in rooms. She answered me with one-word replies. I had become an obstacle, something to be managed, not loved, but I wasn't angry. I was alert. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had returned to my own skin. I started waking up early again, making breakfast just for myself. 1 egg, a slice of toast, half a grapefruit. The knife in my hand felt familiar, grounding. Found old routines again, polishing the silverware, changing the curtains in the dining room, trimming the hedges with the same clippers I'd bought the year she turned 15. I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it to remind the house that I was still here. That I remembered how it felt to care for something that couldn't lie to me. A week later, I walked into the spare bedroom, the one they'd started using as a home office, and noticed the printer had run out of paper. I opened the drawer beneath it to refill it and saw a folder labeled Next Steps Transition Plan. My hands didn't shake this time. Inside were bullet points, budgets, a timeline, references to a potential senior living facility. My name abbreviated, reduced to initials. There was a note to discuss legal status post-signature, a line item marked Phase Out Sensitive Conversations. I closed the folder. I didn't say anything that day. I just made lasagna, the kind with bechamel sauce, and left it warming in the oven until the smell filled the whole house. I played her favorite record on the old player in the living room. I smiled when she walked past. The way ghosts smile in stories, knowing something the living don't see coming. I had no interest in revenge, only readiness. And I was almost there. There's a moment before a storm, before the sky splits, where everything slows down. The leaves stop rustling. Even the birds go quiet. It's not silence. It's a kind of breath. The earth pulling inward, waiting. That's how the house felt. Not empty. Not loud. Just waiting. She didn't know I'd seen the folder. Or maybe she did and hoped I would pretend I hadn't. That was the rhythm we were in now. Shared glances, unspoken truths, the dance of politeness sitting over deception. Like a lace cloth covering something sharp. I wasn't angry. I was past that anger. Is too loud? It clouds your ears. What I felt was quieter, heavier, a kind of reverence almost. I had given my life to this house, to her, and now it was mine to protect again. Not from fire or foreclosure, from forgetfulness. From rewriting, I waited too. More days before I opened the safe. It was built into the back of my closet, hidden behind my old winter coats. She probably thought it only held heirlooms, my mother's brooch, the silver bracelet I never wore. But it held more than that. It held the first copy of the deed, the living trust paperwork, and a letter I wrote to myself the week after she got married. A letter that started with, "Don't give everything away just because they ask nicely." I reread every line of every document, highlighted what had changed, what they had tried to change. I wasn't legally erased. Not yet, but I was being prepared for it. That afternoon, I took a taxi into town. Didn't want to risk asking her for the car. I wanted to move through the city the way I used to, alone, decisive. I carried a tote bag with all the copies tucked beside an umbrella and a packet of almonds. The law office was quiet. My attorney greeted me with a warmth I hadn't felt in weeks, the kind that comes from someone being paid to care, but doing it well anyway. I liked that he didn't treat me like I was fragile. He treated me like someone who had arrived, ready to understand. We spent 2 hours updating the trust. We added protections, reviewed power of attorney, health directives, ownership rights. We drafted a new will, one that reflected who had stood beside me and who had not. It was clinical. It was clean. It was mine. When I signed the final line, he looked up at me and said I should feel proud. I said I didn't feel proud. I felt ready. That night, I left the tote bag by the door and sat by the fireplace. I hadn't lit it in years, but I let the match strike, watched the flame take shape, slow and soft like memory. I drank my tea without rushing, listened to the distant hum of her husband's voice upstairs. They weren't speaking in whispers anymore. Maybe they thought they'd already won. The next morning she came down late, hair still wet from the shower. She poured herself coffee and sat across from me like it was any other day. I waited until she'd taken her first sip. Then I said, without looking up, that I'd visited my lawyer, that we'd made updates, that I'd seen the folder in the office and read every word. Her mug didn't clatter. She was too composed for that. But her eyes held something, not surprise, but calculation. She asked what I meant. What updates? What folder? She feigned confusion, but her hand curled slightly, like she was holding the edge of something sharp. I told her I was no longer confused. That I had copies of everything. That I knew about the transfer plans, the budgets, the line item labeled phase out. She started to speak something about misunderstanding, about things being taken out of context. I raised my hand, not to silence her, but to steady myself. I told her I had always trusted her, that maybe I still did, in some stubborn, bruised part of me. But trust isn't blind. It watches. It remembers. And it protects itself when it must. She said she was only trying to help. I nodded. Then I asked her to define help. Was it the way she moved my belongings without asking? The way she fielded my mail? The way her husband referred to me as a long-term concern in an email I wasn't supposed to see? She didn't deny it. She didn't have to. Silence can confirm things. It's more loudly than words ever could. I told her I wouldn't be signing anything else. That everything legal was now under my care. That the house was and would remain in my name until I decided otherwise. That my memory was intact, my judgment sound. And that if I ever felt otherwise, I would say so. Not her, not him, not anyone else. She sat back in her chair. Her face was a mask, but her hands were trembling. I didn't want to. Not really. I just didn't want to vanish. That afternoon, I went through the house alone, touched every banister, every drawer pull. I made a list of what was mine, not just legally, but emotionally. The hallway mirror she used to practice. Speeches in the swing out back where she learned to braid her own hair. The dining table with the nick in the corner from the time we tried building a birdhouse. I wasn't inventorying possessions. I was reclaiming memory later that week. I had the locks changed. Not because I was afraid, but because some doors need to close all the way before you can breathe again. I thought this silence would feel like punishment, but it felt like air when the locks were changed. I stood at the door for a long while, just running my fingertips over the new key. It was silver, smooth without the worn groove of years. It hadn't passed through other hands, hadn't been copied behind my back. It was mine, only mine. She didn't say anything the day the locksmith came. She watched from the upstairs window as he worked. When she came downstairs later that evening, she didn't ask why. She walked around me like a guest in a house she wasn't sure still welcomed her. I made tea that night and drank it alone. No toast, no jam. Just the steam rising like breath from the mug, curling in the quiet. The next day, they were gone. She left a note on the kitchen table, as if this were something temporary. A short trip, a trial run, something to be reassessed. It said they'd be staying with friends for a while. That things had become tense. That she needed space. No apology. No ownership. Just the vague language of someone writing for record keeping. Not reconciliation. I stood at the table with her words still in my hand and remembered all the times she had asked me for space. As a teenager? As a young bride? As a woman who didn't know how to ask for help without making it sound like an order. I always gave it. But she never gave any back. That was the beginning of the stillness. At first, I moved through the house like it might disappear without noise, checking the windows, opening and closing the cupboards just to hear something. But the silence didn't echo. It settled. It wrapped around me like a weighted blanket. I started to sleep through the night again. I hadn't realized I'd stopped. I cooked for myself without checking to see who else might be hungry. I took walks without texting anyone where I was going. I began reading again, the thick books, the old ones. The ones that don't apologize for being slow. One morning, I pulled a cardboard box from the attic. It was marked "Donate" in faded marker. Inside were baby clothes. Her baby clothes. Pale pink cardigans with frayed sleeves, socks no bigger than my thumb. A small knit cap that still held the faintest trace of lavender from when I used to wash everything by hand. I didn't cry. I just folded each piece gently and placed them into a fresh box. Not for donation, not for throwing away. Just for safekeeping. Because not everything old is meant to be forgotten. I called my lawyer again a week later. We made more updates. We added protections to the trust that even she wouldn't be able to revise, no matter how many signatures she collected. We confirmed my power of attorney. We updated the health care directives, the property line declarations, the named executors. And I chose someone else, not her, a friend from church, Evelyn, a woman I've known for 20 years, who always brings a blanket to service no matter the weather and has never once missed a birthday of mine. She agreed without hesitation, said she'd be honored, said she'd stand by whatever I decided, no matter what came later. I mailed the official notice the next day, 2 weeks past before. I heard from my daughter again, not in person, an email, short, formal. She said she was surprised by the changes, that she didn't understand why I was acting this way, that she'd only ever wanted to ensure my comfort in the years ahead. She used that phrase, "in the years ahead," like I was already gone, already a footnote. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to explain. Some things can't be fixed with one letter, especially when the damage was done slowly over years of turning me into a placeholder instead. I took myself to the garden. It had been neglected, overgrown. The weeds were thick around the tomato bed. The rosemary bush had gone wild. I spent the afternoon pulling roots with my bare hands, dirt under my nails, sweat on my back. My knees ached, but the ache felt clean. Earned, I found the small plaque she gave me 1 year for Mother's Day buried behind the roses. It said, "Home is where your mother is." I stood there a long time, reading it. Then I placed it back in the soil, cleaned around it, and pressed it into the earth with my palm. Not as a declaration, but as a reminder. Later that night, I sat on the porch with the windows open behind me and the lights dim inside. The house was breathing again, not with noise, with presence, with memory, with boundaries that I had built myself. I watched the stars blink into view, one at a time. I listened to the wind in the trees, the faint buzz of a neighbor's television, and, for the first time in a long time, I felt something open in me. Not grief, not pride, just space. A clean, quiet space where my name still meant something, where I didn't have to ask. Permission to belong. She showed up without warning. No text, no call, just the knock, 3 soft taps against the front door, like she was still allowed to be casual. With me, I didn't rush to answer. I let her wait. When I opened it, she stood there in her blazer and soft pink lipstick, holding a reusable coffee cup like she'd just come from errands. Her eyes scanned me quickly, taking inventory, still standing, still sharp, still home. She smiled, but it didn't reach her cheeks. She said she thought we should talk. Said things had gotten too cold between us, and she wanted to clear the air. I stepped aside without speaking. Let her walk in and feel the weight of the house again, the furniture she hadn't moved, the photos she hadn't taken, the smell of rosemary from the soup I'd left simmering. She sat at the kitchen table, same spot as always. Like nothing had changed. Like this was just a mother-daughter chat over coffee and not a reckoning. She started with her voice lowered, the soft kind people use when they're about to say something rehearsed. She said she never intended for things to become so complicated that her only concern was my well-being, that the paperwork was misinterpreted, that there were legal suggestions being made that she didn't fully understand either. I didn't blink. I didn't offer her tea. She said I'd blindsided her. Thought going to a lawyer without telling her had made her feel shut out. Thought the new documents made her feel like a stranger in her own family. I smiled, just slightly. Told her it's strange. How quickly that happens. Isn't it becoming a stranger in a place you built? I said I'd felt it too. That was the first pause. The first real one. Her eyes dropped. She looked at her hands wrapped around the coffee cup like they were cold. She said she didn't think I'd ever question her, that she'd always assumed I trusted her. I said I had trusted her. That's why it hurt. I told her about the day I found the folder, the emails, the budget notes, the words like transition, like asset, like final phase. I told her I remembered every time she'd told me not to worry. Every time she'd said it was just family business. Every time she'd smiled at me like a nurse to a patient, and I told her I wasn't confused. That I never had been. She didn't defend herself, not fully. She said they'd only been planning for the future, that they thought they were protecting me from hard decisions down the line. I asked her why those decisions had no room for my name. Why her protection looked so much like replacement. She didn't answer that one. She looked up then, really looked. I saw the daughter I used to braid hair for. It's the one who would crawl into my bed after a nightmare and ask if I would stay until morning. I saw someone who once needed me, maybe still did, somewhere deep down under the coldness. She asked if there was still a place for her here, not angrily, not as a demand, just a question. And I let the quiet settle before I answered. I said this house will always remember her, that the walls still hold her height marks in pencil behind the pantry door, that the swing still creaks with her laughter, and the front porch still leans slightly where she used to sit cross-legged, reading in the summer sun, But I told her this gently, with no need to wound. That memory does not equal entitlement. That history does not erase harm. That a mother is not an open bank account or a silent beneficiary or a signature waiting to be borrowed. I told her this house will always be part of her story, but it is no longer hers to edit. She sat back. The air. Thinner now. I could feel her weighing her words. She said she didn't want to fight. I told her neither did I, but wouldn't be erased quietly. Not after giving everything. She asked what I wanted from her die. Said honesty, respect, and for her to stop treating me like I was already gone. She didn't cry. She never has been one to cry. But her voice cracked just a little when she said she hadn't realized how far she'd gone. I didn't offer comfort. Some realizations are meant to ache. She stayed for another hour talking softly about surface things. The weather. The neighbor's new dog. A book she said she thought I'd like. I listened, nodded, let the words pass between us like two women who used to know how to speak fluently but had forgotten some of the grammar. When she stood to leave, she looked around the room like she was seeing it again for the first time. The plants. The chipped vase near the window. The sunlight touching the edge of the rug. She didn't ask to stay, and I didn't offer at the door. She said she hoped we could find our way back. I said maybe, but that sometimes the way back isn't the way forward. She left without hugging me, but she didn't slam the door, and that was enough for now. The day after she left, I opened every window in the house, let the air move through the rooms like a clearing. No candles, no incense, just the clean breath of October pressing against curtains and floorboards as if the house itself needed to exhale. It had held too much for too long. I didn't cry. I swept. I pulled the rugs back and dusted behind the baseboards. I gathered every mug they'd left in corners and cabinets and ran them through the dishwasher twice. I scrubbed the kitchen sink until it gleamed like the first month. I'd bought it. It wasn't about erasing them. It was about restoring me. I found a small manila envelope wedged behind the microwave. Inside were receipts, mostly for house improvements I hadn't approved, and one handwritten list of potential buyers for something called Lot B, secondary parcel. My hands didn't shake this time. Simply folded the paper and placed it in the blue folder labeled Attempts. That afternoon, I called Evelyn, the friend I'd named as my legal proxy. She was over in an hour, her cane tapping lightly against the tile as she stepped inside. She brought me carrot cake and a new set of ceramic planters. We sat at the dining room table. No papers, no agenda, just women who understood that silence is not absence. I told her everything, how it started, how far it went, what it had done to my sense of trust, my sense of place. I admitted for the first time aloud, thought I had begun to feel like a guest in my own life. She reached across the table and touched my wrist, not to comfort, but too steady. She said plainly that it happens more than people admit. That mothers are easy to soften, easy to move, easy to revise, especially when they've been quiet for too long. Then she said something I'll never forget. She said, "There's a difference between forgiveness and forgetting who you are." And I realized then I had been waiting for someone to give me back, a permission I had never needed to ask for in the first place. The next morning, I made a list, not of chores or groceries, but of things I had once loved and let go. Gardening, journaling, letters, the small stitched quilt I started the winter after her wedding and never finished because it suddenly felt too lonely to sew anything meant. For warmth, I started with the garden. I called a local nursery and ordered new seeds, lavender, sage, marigold, flowers that thrive in harsh light and come back every year without apology. I hired a neighbor boy, 17 and polite, to help me clear the beds. I told him not to rush, and he didn't. He worked slowly, quietly, never asking questions about the woman who used to park in the driveway or the man who shouted once on the porch when he thought I wasn't home. He didn't need answers. He just helped. When the earth was ready, I planted everything myself, row by row. I pressed my hands into the soil and felt something old and steady return to me. Not power, not pride, just a sense of rhythm I hadn't felt in years, like remembering a melody you used to hum while folding sheets. Later that week, I went into town. I bought a small record player, not digital, not wireless, just a simple turntable with a dust cover and a warm sound. I brought it home and placed it on the side table in the living room, where the air felt still and ready for music. I played Billie Holiday first, then Nina Simone, then nothing at all. Just silence again, but this time it felt earned. Not empty, but whole. I started writing again to Dot. Not long letters, not diaries, just short, quiet entries on blank pages. Moments I wanted to remember on my own terms. The way the jasmine opened after the first frost, the click of the oven cooling, the small joy of finding a penny heads up on the walk to the mailbox. I wrote my name at the bottom of every page, as if to say, yes, I was here, still am. I also made another appointment with my lawyer. Not because I needed anything new, but because I wanted to sit across from someone who knew, legally and plainly, that I still mattered. We finalized the language. There would be no confusion later. The house was mine in name, in title, in spirit. Should anything happen to me, I had a plan, one that did not require her signature, one that did not offer second chances to those who used trust like currency. He asked if I wanted to send her a copy. I said no. Let her find it the way I found the folder when she thinks no one is watching that night. I lit a candle for myself. Just one. Set it near the old photograph of me on the porch steps. 24, sunburned, smiling too wide. I remembered her. The woman with the garden gloves and the chipped coffee mug and the soft resolve to do everything on her own. I missed her. But I hadn't lost her. She had only been quiet, waiting, and she was back now. It happened on a Tuesday. The air was too still for autumn, not cool, not warm, just held. The kind of day where everything seems to wait for a sentence that hasn't yet been spoken. I had invited her and her husband to meet me at the lawyer's office. I didn't use harsh words in the invitation, just facts. A specific time, precise address. A firm line that read, "Please bring all documents related to the property trust and guardianship claims." "I'll be doing the same," she replied, within the hour. Said they'd be there. No greeting, no warmth. I read the message 3 times and said nothing aloud. Just circled the date on the calendar in thick black ink. I arrived early. The receptionist offered me water. I declined. I needed my throat to stay dry, clear, steady. I wore a dark green coat and a silver brooch shaped like a leaf, one she had once given me back when gifts still came wrapped in meaning. They arrived 10 minutes late. Together, as always. Matching coats, matching expressions. Her face was polished, polite. His was unreadable. I watched them walk in, watched her glance around like she didn't quite believe I would follow through. Like part of her still thought I'd stay soft, stay silent, stay someone who could be gently moved aside. The lawyer welcomed them both. His office was neat, the table wide and clean, 2 pens laid precisely across blank notepads. I liked that. No clutter, no confusion. We all sat. Introductions were brief. He began by stating the purpose of the meeting, to clarify legal control of the estate, the trust and the property, to review signatures, to correct any misunderstandings. His tone was even neutral, but his eyes met mine before he started. Reading, he began with the facts. The house belonged to me, full legal ownership. Not just by original deed, but by updated filings reviewed and notarized 3 months ago. He read dates aloud, paragraph numbers, specific language I'd heard before, but this time it landed differently, louder, firmer. Final dot, then came the trust. He explained that as of the new filing, I was sole trustee, that no transfer of rights could occur without my active consent, that all previous attempts to revise the trust, including the unsigned drafts we'd discovered, were now nullified and filed for legal record as unauthorized proposals. She shifted in her chair then, just slightly. Her husband leaned forward. Asked to see the copies. The lawyer slid them across the table. Every page was stamped, notarized, witnessed. He didn't argue. Not yet. He said they'd just been planning, responsibly, that they thought I needed help navigating the complexities of long-term care, financial protection, legacy planning. He used words that sounded clinical, but his hands were fidgeting, folding the corner of the paper back and forth like it owed him something. I listened without blinking. Then I spoke. I said I understood what planning looked like. I'd done plenty in my life. I'd planned how to raise a child alone, how to pay off a mortgage on one income, how to hide Christmas presents in coat closets without being discovered. I'd planned how to survive, how to stretch casseroles, how to sit through school plays and job rejections and long, aching silences. What I hadn't planned for was being treated like a fragile asset. I said it clearly, so she would remember. I told her I'd read the notes, the budget projections, the phase-out plan. I told her I knew they'd been waiting for me to stop noticing things. She opened her mouth, maybe to deny it, maybe to reframe it, but the lawyer gently raised his hand. He said the time for clarification had passed. Then he read the final line of the new documentation, that in the event of any further attempts to alter or undermine the terms of the trust, the legal protections now allowed me to escalate immediately, not through family mediation, but through court-verified restraining action, if necessary. She looked at me then, finally, and for the first time I saw fear. Not of me. I'd never harmed her, but fear of being exposed, of being seen, fully and clearly. Without the filters of family loyalty or gentle assumptions, she asked why. I'd gone so far. I said I hadn't. That I'd simply stopped shrinking. That I'd let the truth walk into the room without apology. Her husband leaned back, lips pressed tight. He said they didn't want to fight. I said they already had. They just hadn't expected me to hold the pen. The meeting ended quietly. No raised voices, no last-minute confessions. Just paperwork gathered, signatures confirmed, coats buttoned. Before she left, she turned back once. She asked if we were finished. I said no, but we were beginning again on different terms. Terms with my name printed in ink. No one could smudge. The morning after the meeting, I woke up without dread. That surprised me. I lay there a while, listening to the faint tick of the hallway clock and the birds outside the window. I didn't rush to get up. There was nothing urgent waiting for me. No forms slid across the table, no decisions made behind closed doors. Just the ordinary rhythm of a life I had reclaimed. I made tea slowly. Let the water boil instead of rushing it in the microwave like I had when things were tense. I used the lemon mug I'd stopped touching because it reminded me of her. This time, it didn't sting. It was just a mug, ceramic hole. I took it outside to the back porch. The air was cool, brushed with that dry crispness only late autumn knows. The rosemary by the steps had started to bloom again. Tiny blue flowers, reaching out despite the cold. I sat with my legs tucked beneath me, sipped the tea, and let the light settle over my face. It wasn't joy I felt. Not exactly. It was space. I hadn't realized how long I'd been squeezing myself into corners, trying not to disturb, not to demand, not to remind anyone that I had a name on things, a presence, a pulse. Now the corners were gone, and I had room to breathe. Later that day, I drove to the hardware store. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just a quiet errand with purpose. I bought paint swatches, a new front doormat, and a brass plate for the mailbox. One that read M. Halstead. Not the Halsteads. Not family home, just me. The man at the register asked if I was doing some updating. I smiled and said yes. That things needed to reflect who was really living there now. He laughed, said, "Good for you." But I don't think he knew how much. I meant it. When I got home, I cleaned out the coat closet, not in anger, not to erase anyone, just to make room. I packed away jackets that weren't mine, shoes I never wore, folded scarves I hadn't touched in 2 winters. I made space for my own things, The green coat I loved but kept in the back, the wool gloves with the tiny stitched initials, the umbrella with the wooden handle. Each small act felt like a breath, a returned heartbeat. That night I lit the fire again, not for warmth, for ritual. I sat with a notebook on my lap and started making a new kind of list, not of tasks, not of people to call, just a list of what I wanted to remember, things I hadn't said out loud in a long time. I know how to be alone without being lonely. My name belongs on more than envelopes. No one gets to rewrite the story while I'm still breathing. Love is not a loophole. I read the list twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer beside my bed under the hand cream. And my old library card that weekend, I invited Evelyn over again. We didn't talk about the lawyer or the meeting or the long shadow of what had almost been done to me. We made soup together. She peeled potatoes. I chopped carrots. She told me a story about her sister getting remarried in a blue dress. I told her about the first night I brought my daughter home from the hospital. How she refused to sleep unless my hand rested on her belly. We laughed, and it didn't feel like covering something up. It felt like letting something in after dinner. She hugged me before leaving. A real hug. The kind that doesn't expect anything back as she stepped onto the porch. She paused and turned. She said, "You look more yourself again." I told her I felt it, that I hadn't gone anywhere. I'd just been waiting for everyone else to stop talking over me that night. I sat by the window long after the lights went out. I watched the leaves fall one by one from the maple tree in the yard. Not rushed, not torn, just released. There's something holy in that. The quiet drop, the unresisted letting go. And I understood something then. I hadn't taken anything back in that meeting. I had only reminded them that it was never theirs too. The next day, I called the notary to finalize a few more things. I rewrote parts of my will. I donated clothes I didn't wear. I mailed a letter to a friend I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, and I planned a small trip just 2 days away, a quiet B&B by the coast. I'd go alone. I didn't need company to feel whole when the confirmation email came through. Felt like more than a booking. It felt like a door opening, not because I was running, because I was finally, gently stepping forward. I left the porch light on when I locked the front door behind me, not for anyone else, just for the house. A small gesture, like saying, "I'll be back." You're not empty, you're resting. I packed light. 2 changes of clothes, a paperback, my notebook, and the little blue windbreaker I'd had for years. I didn't bring makeup or matching shoes. I didn't check the weather. I didn't ask anyone to watch over things. The house had made it through worse than 2 quiet nights alone. The drive to the coast was slow and steady. I took the old roads instead of the highway, the ones with the peeling barn signs and the trees that lean over the asphalt. Like they're still deciding whether to stay rooted. I've passed places I used to take her when she was small. The orchard with the hand-painted cider sign, the gas station with the giant metal rooster out front. She used to call it the funny bird place. I let the memories pass through me without resistance. They didn't sting the way they used to. They arrived and left like waves, not erasing anything, just softening the edges. The Badan breakfast was a white clapboard house set back from the road, with shutters the color of old denim and a sign that swung in the breeze. Seabury Inn. There were wind chimes on the porch, not the cheap kind, the heavy brass. Ones that sound like church bells when they move. The woman who ran the place was named June. Her voice was low, warm and slow, like someone who's never been in a hurry to explain herself. She handed me a real key, not a plastic card, and pointed me to the room with the corner window. She said it had the best morning light. I unpacked in silence, folded my clothes into the small wooden drawers like I was preparing a space for someone I respected. The window overlooked a wild garden, not overgrown but untamed. Lavender, thistle, snapdragon, nothing pruned, everything alive. I took my tea down to the beach that evening. There wasn't a crowd, just one couple walking. A dog in the distance and a boy digging in the sand near the dunes. The wind carried the smell of salt and wet stone. I found a dry log and sat facing the ocean, letting the rhythm of the waves lull something loose inside me. It wasn't peace I felt at first, it was permission to sit without explaining, to breathe, without being evaluated, to be still without being watched. I reached into my bag and pulled out my notebook. I wrote slowly, nothing grand. Just this. Today I walked into a room that wasn't waiting for anyone else. Today, didn't check my reflection before leaving the house. Today, I took up space and nothing broke. When I looked up, the sun was melting into the water, the sky, purple at the edges. I stayed until it was gone. The inn was quiet that night. No music, no television, just the creak of the walls and the soft hush of strangers settling into sleep. I opened the window and lay on the bed with the blanket pulled to my chest. Not because I was cold, but because I liked the weight. It reminded me that I was still. Here, still mine, the next morning. The light found me, just like she said it would. It poured in through the corner window, soft and pale and steady. I sat up without rushing. No one was waiting for me to speak. No one was watching to see if I remembered names or appointments or how I liked my coffee. I was allowed to just exist. I made my way downstairs to the dining room where June had sat. Out a quiet breakfast, nothing elaborate. Just toast, soft cheese, and berries in a ceramic bowl. I ate without checking my phone, without distraction, without needing to fill the space with words. She asked how I slept. I said deeply. She nodded like she already knew. Before I left that afternoon, I wrote a short note and tucked it under the pillow. Thank you for giving me a room where no one expected me to be anything but rested. I didn't leave a name, just the folded paper. On the drive home, I took the long way again, past the old mill, the faded sign that once read fresh eggs, the corner store with the slanted porch steps. It was all still there, unchanged. But I had shifted. Something quiet had lifted from my shoulders. Not grief, not even anger. Just the constant weight of justifying my place. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same. But I stood for a moment before unlocking the door, as if asking it permission to enter. And it welcomed me. Familiar. Unbothered. Whole. I placed my bag inside and set the keys on the hall table. The porch light was still on, still waiting, still mine. I didn't unpack right away. The suitcase stayed by the stairs for 3 days, not out of laziness, but because I didn't want to rush the return. It was strange how even a short trip could rearrange something inside you. The rhythm of solitude, once you find it, makes noise feel unfamiliar again. The house was still. It didn't greet me with creaks or groans. It didn't ask for anything. Simply let me walk through it without expectation. I liked that. I needed that. On the 4th morning, I pulled the case to the bedroom and began refolding the clothes. Not everything went back into the closet. Some of it, this soft blue sweater, the sandals I wore on the beach, went into a separate drawer. One, I labeled away things, not for escape, but for remembering who I had been when no one needed me. That afternoon, I cleared off the dining room table. I set down my legal folder, my notebooks, a clean pad of paper, and 2 pens. I opened the windows, let the wind stir the edges of my notes. Then I sat and I began to write my new plans. Not a 5-year strategy, not a list of punishments or exclusions, but something more deliberate, more sacred, a plan for how I wanted to be remembered. Not by her, not by the people who had tried to fold me into paperwork, but by myself. I began with the will. I reread the wording, the names, the designations. I revised what needed to be clearer. I removed what felt performative. And I wrote a letter to accompany it, a separate page, handwritten, in ink that won't fade quickly. It said this: "This house was never about money. It was about mornings and mail and soup and humming in the hallway when no one was around. If you find yourself standing in this kitchen wondering what matters, the answer is the scent of rosemary, the rhythm of laundry, the way light hits the floor around 4:30 in winter. That's what I leave behind, not furniture, not property, but presence. After that, I made a list of names. People who had shown up when it mattered. Evelyn, a neighbor who always brought my bins back up the driveway. A former student of mine from the community center. Now grown and raising her own daughter, she still sends me a card every New Year's, with a handwritten note on the back. These were the people I wanted to be part of whatever came next. Not because they had titles, but because they had presence. I folded the will and letter together and placed them in the safe behind the closet. Not hidden, just held. Just protected. Then I turned to something else, something I hadn't dared do in a long time. I started writing a bio for myself, not for a funeral, not for a resume for me. It began like this. I am a woman who stayed. Through storms, through silence, through the long echo of my own name when no one used it. I planted, I mended, I made the meals, even when no one said thank you. And in the end, I stood in the house they tried to take from me, not shouting, not crying, just holding the deed in one hand and the truth in the other. That one took longer, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted it to sound like someone had finally listened. I pinned that page to the inside of the cabinet where I keep the old serving dishes. No one opens it much, but if they ever do, it'll be there, a quiet record. A map of who I was in case memory fades. That evening, cooked myself something nice. Lemon chicken, roasted carrots, and a single glass of wine. I lit the candles, not out of ritual, but out of joy. I played music, not soft background, but something with strings and soul. The kind of music that fills a room even when it's just you inside it. I sat at the head of the table. I ate slowly. I let every bite remind me that I could nourish myself, not out of necessity, but out of regard. Used the linen napkin set I'd been saving. I didn't save it anymore after the dishes were done. I stood by the window, tea in hand, and watched the porch light flicker. It needed a new bulb. I made a note to change it in the morning. Then I said aloud, into the empty room, I remember who I am now, and the house, steady and unchanged, seemed to nod back. Not everything had healed, but something had begun. And I wasn't asking anyone for permission to keep going. It was the mail that gave me the idea, not the envelopes themselves. Those had been coming all along, but the return address on one in particular was from the county recorder's office, confirming the updated deed filing. My name printed cleanly, no cosigners, no footnotes. A simple rectangle of paper, but it felt like a flag. Not one to wave. One to plant. I held it in my hand a long time before I opened the drawer in the hallway and found the old frame. It had once held a watercolor of tulips, but the painting had long since faded to pale greens and grays. I removed the print, slipped the deed into the frame, and wiped the glass with my sleeve. Then I hung it, not in the office, not in a drawer, but in the front hallway, where the sunlight would touch it each afternoon. It wasn't for visitors, it was for me, so I'd see it every time I came home. And remember, I stayed. I protected it. I claimed what was mine without raising my voice, and no one could touch it now. That same week, I went through the last box in the attic, the one labeled "Do Not Sort." The handwriting was mine, years old, faded. Inside were odds and ends I hadn't dared face. A hospital bracelet from the night she was born, her first school drawing. An anniversary card from a man who had long since vanished from both of our stories. I sat on the floor, legs folded, and opened each item like a page in a book I used to love. There was grief, yes, but it was no longer sharp. It was rounder, now softer, like a stone carried for a long time in the palm. Worn down by the simple act of being held, I chose one thing from the box, a photograph of the two of us on the back steps. She was 10, I was tired, but smiling. Our faces turned toward the same sun. I took it downstairs and placed it on the small shelf near the fireplace, not out of sentimentality, out of honesty. She was part of the story, not all of it, but part. That evening, I stood in the yard with a small trowel in one hand and a packet of seeds in the other. Poppies, the kind that bloom bright and sudden. The soil was ready. I'd already cleared the bed near the edge of the fence. I knelt slowly, careful of my knees, and pressed each seed into the earth like a promise. Not that everything would bloom, but that I would keep planting anyway. I marked the spot with a painted stone. It's just one word. Still here, still me, still more to come. The next morning, I wrote a letter. Not one I planned to send, just something I needed to say. Dear one, I gave you the softest parts of me. Not just because I loved you, but because I believed that's what mothers do. I made space even when there was none left. I handed over keys without asking for receipts. I said yes when I should have said not yet. But I've learned something now. Love is not about staying small so someone else can feel big. It is not about handing over your voice just because the room gets loud. It is not about disappearing politely. I am not your burden. I am not your backup plan. I am not the silent witness to my own erasure. I am the woman who stayed, who learned to speak again, who hung her name on the wall like a photograph no one's allowed to take down, and you can choose to visit that woman or not, but she no longer waits. I folded the letter and tucked it into the back of my journal. If she ever asked to understand, maybe I'd let her read it. Or maybe not. Some truths are sacred not because they're secret, but because they were earned. That afternoon, I sat in the swing under the maple tree and let myself sway. The branches above me were almost bare now, just a few stubborn leaves refusing to fall. I watched one tremble in the wind, clinging to the edge. Then I watched it let go. I didn't feel sad. I felt witness later. As the sun slipped down, I walked back inside. The hallway was bathed in gold light. The framed deed caught it just right. The glass glowing my name, casting a soft shadow on the wall behind it. I stood there a moment, touched the frame, and whispered, "This is mine, not the house. Not the paper, but the moment, the clarity, the woman I had become by not backing down." I left the hallway light on that evening, not for safety, but because some victories deserve to be lit. Some endings don't come with applause. They arrive like dusk, slow, without ceremony. Just the light changing color and the air taking on a hush you don't notice until you realize you've turned on a lamp without meaning to. This ending came like that, not with confrontation or final words, but with quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore. It's been a month since the last message from her. No subject line, just a sentence that read, "Hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you need anything." I didn't reply, not because I didn't have words, but because I finally knew which words weren't mine to spend anymore. Needing something isn't the same as being available for harm. That's what I've learned. You can love someone with your whole life and still choose not to walk back into the same fire that burned you the first time. So I let the message sit. I let it live in the inbox. It's unread but understood. Instead, I kept living. I went to the Sunday market with Evelyn. We bought fresh basil and 2 lemon tarts. We sat on the bench outside the bookstore and ate in silence, wiping crumbs from our jackets. It felt like prayer, not to anything in particular, but to the version of ourselves that still believed in quiet joys. I started reading again, 1 chapter a night. I started brushing my hair slowly instead of tying it up without thought. I repotted the rosemary. I bought a hummingbird feeder. I left my shoes by the door in a neat row. Not because anyone told me to, but because I liked the way it made this room feel held. And each day I said my name to myself once, softly, out loud, just to remember it belongs to me. Sometimes I pass the framed deed in the hallway and run my hand along the edge of the glass, not to check it's still there. I know it is, but because it reminds me of what it cost to hang it there. What I had to believe about myself, not just as a mother or a homeowner or a woman, but as a person worthy of protecting, worthy of keeping. Not everyone will understand that kind of quiet. Ownership, they'll say I was bitter or stubborn or too proud to ask for help. Let them say it. Let them create their versions of me from a distance. I'm not here to rewrite anyone's story but my own. Last week, I sent a small check to the women's shelter in town. No letter, no name attached. Just a note that said, for someone who's starting over, tell her she isn't weak. I folded it twice and sealed it with care. Sometimes survival needs no explanation, only a witness. And I become a good witness to my own life. I see the parts I let slide, the spaces I shrank to keep the peace, the dinner tables where I stayed quiet, thinking silence was noble, the way I let my name fade from documents, conversations, futures, but I see the return to dot the small steps. Back into wholeness. The click of the lock I changed myself. The porch I swept alone in the dark. The soup I made without setting a second place. And I don't miss the noise. Not anymore. I think that's what real peace is, not the absence of pain, but the absence of begging to be seen. I see myself now clearly, fully, without apology. I am not perfect. I am not easy. But I am here with this house, this name, this life. I am still the woman who raised a child with both hands and a tired heart. I am still the woman who signed the forms when no one believed I knew what I was doing. I am still the woman who stood at the edge of being erased and said, "Not yet, not ever." There's a small pine box on my dresser now. Inside it are simple things. A copy of the updated trust, the will, the letter I wrote to her but never sent, and a photo of me planting poppies near the fence line. The box isn't locked. It's not hidden. It just waits. One day someone will find it. Maybe her, maybe someone else. And they'll open it and they'll know this wasn't a story of vengeance. It was a story of reclamation, of a woman who stopped asking for a seat at a table she built with her own hands. Tonight the house is quiet again. The porch light is on. The swing creaks gently in the breeze. And inside, everything is steady. I don't know what happens next. I don't need to. I've already returned to myself. And that is enough. That is everything. Now I'm curious about you. Have you ever experienced something like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you stayed with me until now, thank you. I'll leave you with 2 other stories I think you'll love.